What's up, happy fabricators? I'm excited to be back. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing review on the PRIMEWELD Mig 285. Now at the current time of this video, this machine comes in at less than $1,000 before taxes. There's a couple things I'm super excited about and features on this machine. Number one, this thing has on-demand fans. So that means that if you step away from the thing for a while and it cools down, it's going to shut those noisy fans off automatically. Then as soon as you pick up that torch, start welding again, they will turn on. That's a cool feature. And the other cool thing about this machine is it might as well be a multi-process machine because it does MIG, lift arc TIG, stick welding, and you can run a spool gun off of it. Now this is going to be a fairly long video because we have a lot to break down and go over on this machine. So in the event that you have a certain process that is prompting your curiosity, we're going to leave timestamps down below so you can go directly to that process and not have to waste any time there. Now, one quick little disclaimer before we get started. This video is sponsored by PRIMEWELD, but I am allowed to say whatever I want about it. PRIMEWELD has not overviewed this video or seen it before it is published. So I'm going to tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about this machine, and hopefully the goal of this video is just to provide you the information to further your choice on whether this is the machine that you want in your shop. So let's get started. So as always, the packing is phenomenal on this thing. The machine came in a full clamshell with full shielded corners on both top and bottom. The bottom corners are metal shielded and the top corners are plastic shielded. Everything is tight in the box, so there is very little, if any, room for things to jiggle around and get damaged. Okay, so I spared you the drama of pulling everything out of the box. We're gonna go over all the components that this machine came with. First off, and I feel is one of the most important, is this thing comes with almost a hardback. This is a solid instruction manual. This thing is very simple, which is good. It lays out all the processes. It shows basic settings and basic troubleshooting. So I really appreciate this, how much effort they put into these instruction manuals. Number two is they have a laminated copy of your settings. So you don't have to reference inside the machine, get down underneath it and lift it up. You have this laminated copy that you can poster board up on your wall and quickly reference it. It also has how to set up all your leads for all the different processes, so you don't have to question that. You don't have to even go to the instruction manual to reference that. Shows your duty cycle and all the basic functions of the main buttons on the machine. So that is really cool little thing that PRIMEWELD adds to their thing. So we've got a argon gas line, supply line here, and it's a nice good one. It's got crimped fittings, doesn't have hose clamps on it. We've got a 15-foot Tweco stinger or torch, whatever you want to call it. This thing takes your standard large Tweco consumables, which is really cool. So first off, that's a step up from the older style torches that they used to have. Now they're making this kind of their industry standard. And also the thing I love about that is it now makes these more readily available from your local suppliers. A lot of local suppliers will carry the Tweco style consumables, so you can get those easier. They've got a nice big sprung restraint on the front of this, so that's going to minimize the chance of this stinger getting fatigued. What else we got here? We have the power adapter, so this allows you to plug from here into the machine. It's that little plug there. What else we got? We have our 220 to 110 voltage adapter. So this allows you to, in the event that you don't have 220 access at the moment, you can stick this on the machine and adapt it down to a 110 outlet and do some smaller work. So next up here we have our stick stinger. Now this is a little different one than comes with the MiG 180 or 200. This one says it's rated for 300 amps. That's what's stamped on it. I mean, it's not bad. It's definitely got plastic housing and stuff, so these could get broken. But it's definitely a heavier gauge wire than the ones that come with their prior models. It comes with a standard 35 to 50 millimeter DIMS connector, and this is a 12-foot long stinger or lead. We also have a ground or earth clamp here, and this is a huge upgrade from their prior models. The prior models we had the sheet metal style like this, and this is a solid brass rated for 300 amp ground clamp, and I even ground this down to just make sure it wasn't brass coated. It appears to be solid brass. It's not magnetic at all. The spring on this thing is super heavy duty. They upped the gauge of the wire from their prior machines, and this as well has the standard DINS connector on there. This is also a 12-foot lead. Next up, we've got a little accessories kit here. We've got an Allen key and a little multi-tool wrench. I assume that's for consumables. We've got an additional set of drive rollers here. And the final thing that we have is the PRIMEWELD regulator, and it's stuffed in here in a nice formed box where it cannot get damaged. So, standard regulator that comes with all of their other machines. So now we've taken a look at all the accessories on this thing. Let's get it all plugged in and put together, and then we'll do a complete walk around and go over some of the specific features of the machine itself and the capabilities that it has. Okay, so now that we got this thing all plugged in, let's do a quick little walk around and go over some of the features. I think we're going to start on the back of the machine over here. So on the back of the machine here, we have our on-off breaker switch. We have our power lead, which is a nice big 10 gauge formed power lead, so we don't have to worry about the ends coming undone on those. I really like those. We've got our gas hose. One little thing that I think is just nice touches that they've added that weren't on their other machines is just labeling stuff. Like we have the thread labeled here, 5/8 18 thread. I tried to do a project on something a while back and it was a headache to find the thread pitch on it, and just having little things like this labeled is nice touches. Come around over here to the side of the machine, and the second nice touch that I really like about this machine is the direction that this side door opens. A lot of machines open with the door opening up instead of opening down like this, and traditionally your welder is down lower on a cart. So in order to look inside and reference this chart or even just access stuff, you gotta like get down on your hands and knees and like lift that thing up to get in there. This is nice because from a standing position, if your welder is down on the ground, we can just open this thing up and peer inside. So I think that's a really great touch. As I said before, we have our chart here for all of our settings. This machine is capable of holding either an 11-pound spool or a 33-pound spool, which is cool. We can get that big dog spool in there. Up here inside, you can see hiding is our indicator switch that switches us from a spool gun to the MIG welding settings. So in the event that you decide you're going to use a spool gun on this machine, you want to make sure that you click that little switch over. Also, we have a dual roller drive, which I think is really cool. This is going to allow us to put longer whips on this machine, which it already comes with a longer whip. It comes factory with that 15-foot whip on it. It's also just going to cater to better consistency. And especially if you're doing a flux core, that tends to be a softer wire with that flux on there and can tend to get all jarred up. So having two rollers to be able to evenly push stuff out that sleeve is just going to provide better performance overall. So over here we have our more traditional style wire tensioning set up. Got the flip down, and you can dial in your tension there, pop it up to change out your drive rollers. We have a nice little knurled screw here. See that guy? And just little things like that. You don't have to have a tool to be able to change those drive rollers. Another thing that I noticed in here, this may not be a thing for you guys, but I just noticed the angle of this drive setup, and what that allows is just a little less stress on your leads, because gravity is going to work and those leads are going to hang down, and having this drive set up at a slight angle going down is going to relieve some of the pressure on the Stinger itself. So I think that's a cool design. A lot of their other machines, this drive setup just comes straight out, which isn't a huge deal, but just these little things that they've thought of on this machine I think are really cool. One concern that I did have in this area is this bulkhead that the drive setup is mounted to. And you can grab this, and there's just a little bit of play in here. It may not be a big deal at all, seems plenty strong, but just having that play in there, I know we're not supposed to, but in the end, everybody ends up reefing on their leads, and I don't know if long term, if we will see any consequences to not having that center bulkhead that this drive setup is mounted to being more robust, but time will only tell about that. But that is the only thing that I really noticed in here. Other than that, everything is super solid. Okay, so moving along to the front of the machine here, and I just wanted to show you this real quick. Pretty cool when you flip this thing on. Look at that readout. We've got PRIMEWELD Mig 285. I just think that's kind of a cool little thing that they put in there. But we've got two knobs on the front of the machine. We have one knob that is for wire speed or your current. And this is kind of a synergic setup similar to the MTS 200, where the initial current knob will slightly adjust your voltage values to get a relationship with that. But we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of that later on in the video. We're just going over the basics here. And then the second knob here we have is for our voltage control and dialing that in a little tighter. And then these knobs are also push capable for going through menu functions. We've got a 2T, 4T button, and then we've got our function button that goes from MIG to TIG to stick and back to MIG. Third and final button that's on the front of this thing is our advanced settings, and we'll dig into that later in the video. There are some cool advanced settings for MIG welding that I've never actually tried before, so we're going to dig into that a little bit later. But overall, the front of the machine is just very clean looking. Okay, so now that we've assessed the basic features of the machine, we're going to do some welding. So I'm going to start off with MIG welding. We put 035 wire in the machine, so we're going to be at 19 volts and 280 inches per minute per the diagram. So over here we have our current, or inches a minute speed, so we'll roll this down to 280-ish over here. And then on the chart we had 19 volts, so we're at 18.9 volts. In the event that you want to dial your voltage in a little further, you just grab the voltage knob here. And this is a little different, I'm not sure. So, and as we can see, our voltage is at 18.9. So let's say we want to bring that to actually up to that 19 volts that the chart is recommending per se. But they call this a fine voltage control. So what this actually does, instead of changing the voltage directly, it changes it in percentage to what it existing is. So we're going to do this and it'll say 1%. And then you wait a second, and then it'll add that 1% to the existing voltage. So now we're at 19.1% voltage. So I'm not sure the reasoning behind that. It seems like it would be a little more intuitive if you could just change the voltage and it wasn't a percentage of the voltage. The other button we have here is our 2T and 4T. Now your 2T is for just normal welding. You pull the trigger, you get an arc, you let go of the trigger, you let off. Your 4T, you pull the trigger and let go of it, and you will continue to weld, and then you pull the trigger and let go of it again, and it will turn off. Okay, so now that we have that set up, the other feature that we have to be able to change is our inductance. So to do that, we hold this button down and turn it, and we have down to -10 and up to +10 inductance. Now I'm just going to leave that at 0, or it's kind of neutral position. If you don't know what inductance is it's kind of like your frequency on a TIG welder. Since this is a short arc machine, that wire comes out and shorts out on the material itself. And the speed at which it does that is one determined by your travel speed, but also by the inductance and the frequency that it burns back each time. So with inductance, sometimes you can increase the heat of your puddle by turning that inductance up, and sometimes even decrease the spatter, or you can turn that inductance down and put a little less heat input sometimes into a thin piece of material. Now that we're set up there, we're going to go into the final button, which is the advanced features button, and we're going to give that a push. You hold it for 3 seconds, and then your options pop up. So you can pick whether you're welding aluminum, whether you're welding flux core, whether you're welding 100% carbon dioxide or CO2, or C25, which is mixed, which we are doing. So we'll just hit that. That'll save itself in the computer. If we continue to hit the advanced settings, we have wire diameter. So we have a choice between 0405, 035, and 025. So we have 035 wire. We will click that. Go on to our next setting. We have a pre-flow setting. So you can go all the way up to 2 seconds of pre-flow and all the way down to 0. We'll just set that at a 1/4 second pre-flow. We'll hit it again. We have our post-flow. So we can go all the way from 0 up to, let's see what we got here. Looks like 10 seconds of total post-flow that we can set on this thing. I'm just going to set that to roughly 1.5 seconds on the post flow. Going to hit our button again. We have run in, burn back, wire sharpness, spot welding, stitching, and other inches per minute. You can reset the default settings here, and then we have our outer hour meter, which obviously I haven't put any hours on this thing yet, so we have 0 hours of actually runtime, which is kind of a cool feature that you can, especially if you're going to purchase this machine used in the future, you're going to be able to fire this thing up and go into the settings and look and see how many hours of runtime this machine has actually had on it, which is kind of cool. All that burn back and spot welding, all that stuff, we'll go into that in more depth a little on in the video. But right now I'm going to start burning some wire on some plate, and as soon as I'm done, I'm going to show you the results. That is a smooth running machine. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the results we got here. Some of these are still hot, but you can see we got some nice clean 1/8 inch here. Very little spatter. Now this was set with just the synergic settings, so based off the chart, what the machine had. But see, that's pretty dialed and clean looking. We've got some 3/16 here. So this is single pass. You can see the little start here, there was some spatter and it wasn't quite as smooth. That was not due to the machine, that was dyslexic, I set my settings backwards. But then the rest of it, this is one pass 3/16, and that went in very nicely. And then we've got some other big ones here. This is 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch material right here. And as you can see, that wet in very nicely. So we've got kind of a weave pass on that side and just a straight stringer on this side. There's just a little bit of cold lap on this side. I think I probably could have turned the amperage up even a little more. This thing wasn't even full out doing that. And we're also on 035 wire. So if we dump some 045 in here, we got that current running through this thing, I bet it would just burn it right in. But so far, I'm really liking what I'm seeing. Next thing we're gonna do is jump into some of these advanced settings that we have and talk about them a little bit and see what kind of difference they make. Okay, so the first advanced setting we're going to talk about, besides pre-flow and post-flow, we already went over those earlier, is going to be run-in. So that's the next one in line here. We're going to hold our advanced settings to 3 seconds. We have our process, we have our wire diameter, pre-flow, post-flow, and run-in. Now this presets to 30%, and we can go as much up to, I believe, 150%. So what run-in is the percentage that the wire speed travels before an arc is ignited. So when you just pull your trigger like this, your wire speed is going here. Current settings is 35%. So I have 500 inches a minute here set up from the last welding that I was doing. And so if this is at 30%, that's going 30% of 500 inches a minute, because your settings on your run-in are going to differ between the inches per minute and the size of wire that you're using. So that just gives you something to play with to be able to get smoother arc starts, to minimize that spatter and just get a cleaner start overall. So the next advanced setting that we're going to talk about is essentially the opposite of run-in, and it's called burn back. This can be referenced on the same page that you've seen the other ones, but we're going to go to the advanced settings again. We're going to hold for 3 seconds. We're going to cycle through until we get to burn back. Now, burn back is the amount of time that your wire stops from the time you let off the trigger. So for example, when you let off the trigger, if your wire stopped immediately, that ball or molten puddle could get stuck to the tip a lot easier. Or if you don't have enough burn back, your wire might not fully extinguish or burn off the part, and you might get stuck to the part and actually have to trim it off. So if you find yourself having to clip the wire off a little bit before you start each time, you might need to dial that burn back a little bit, or vice versa. If you're getting your wire stuck to your contact tip every time and it is not allowing that to stop just a whatever your desired, I don't know, say 1/4 inch out of the shielding cup is, you might want to dial that burn back out a little bit. Okay, so the next advanced setting we're going to talk about on this machine is called wire sharp. And what that does is it gives a last minute little burst of amperage at the end right as you let off the trigger to do two things. One, it helps eliminate that little ball that can end on the end of your wire that you want to clip off. And the other thing is that last little burst of amperage kind of helps flatten that puddle out right at the very end so that you don't have as much of a crown, and that kind of helps your restart. So if you are stopping and in need to restart, maybe that will minimize the chance that you have to grind out as much of your start to continue. And then also that's just going to make a smoother start, not having that big ball on the end of your wire. Okay, so our spot feature is basically just a timer so that you can set how long it takes to pull the trigger before your arc goes off. So it's basically meant for tack welding. So if you're doing thin sheet metal, we can set that down to a half second. Actually, we can go down from a tenth of a second all the way up to a 20-second tack. That's a big, long tack. But basically, you can just dial it in on how long the timer will turn your tack off. So as you can see here, I had this set to a 2-second spot, and that allowed me just to have a quick preset tack weld. Okay, so the next process we're going to take a look at is stitch welding. So we're going to hold our advanced button for 3 seconds, go to processes, click through until we get to our stitch. We're going to turn it on, go to the next one. Now the stitch time is the amount of time that you are actually welding. So these are seconds, so let's just say that we're going to be welding for 2.5 seconds. And then the dwell time is the time that we're not welding. So for example, we'll do 1 second. That's as high as it goes up that you're not welding. And we'll show an example of that real quick. So as you can see here, we have our on and off. Now this is going to be very all dependent on the accuracy and travel speed that the human can do. We'll do one more example. Let's tighten it up. Let's do our weld time as, let's say, 1 second, and our dwell time as, let's say, half a second. So that was a little faster speed on the time, but because of that, like you can see, it did not put as much heat into it, so we actually don't have great penetration on the bottom side of that. So this is with the weld time and the dwell time at its fastest settings on both of them. I mean, it looks really clean, but I question the penetration of it with it pulsing like that and not having the continuous heat into the part. So I did some more, and as you can see, there's not even any heat signature on the back side of this plate. So it definitely did not have good penetration through there. I bet I could even break it apart. The next advanced feature here isn't necessarily a feature. It's still under the advances. I think it's more of a numeral preference. So we go through it till we get to switch, and this is our units preference. So basically if you want inches per minute or if you want meters per minute. So after that, our final thing is our factory default. Now if we turn this guy to yes and leave it there, that will reset this machine all back to factory settings, but the hour meter on the machine. And then so now that we've gone through all our advanced settings, this machine still has more it can do. I think we're going to try out some shielded flux core, maybe stick the aluminum spool gun on it, do some stick welding, and do some lift TIG with it. Okay, so we ran some 045 flux core on some 1/2 inch material here, and it laid down real nicely. Ooh, this is still warm actually. All of these are single passes, so a couple of them, the difference is just travel speed. So obviously this wider one, we had a little bit slower travel speed, and these narrower ones, I just was playing with my travel speeds there. And then we ran some 045 on some 1/4 inch material as well, and it laid down real nicely. So the next function this thing has is TIG welding. This machine is equipped with lift arc TIG, so we're gonna stick a TIG rig on this thing and see how it functions. Okay, so to get our lift TIG to work, we've got to switch it over, and what we're gonna need is a TIG rig or a TIG torch that has a valve on it. Now this does not come with this specific machine, but it can be purchased separately from PRIMEWELD or CK individually. You can reference your chart here and it'll show you how to set up that individual process. So let's get it all set up. Okay, so now to switch ourselves over to lift TIG, we're just gonna hit the function button here and drop that over to lift TIG. Now our right hand is our amperage, so we have from a 10 amp startup all the way up to 250 amps on the lift TIG process. So I think I'm going to weld some 1/8 inch, so we'll run this right around 130 amps. Okay, so we're going to break open our Weld Metals Online coupons. These are great little practice coupons. I have a coupon code down in the description for these guys to try out our lift TIG. And I'm just going to start out with some 1/8 inch stainless. Now remember, this is a DC only process with the lift TIG on this machine, so you can run your stainless or mild steel. I was running that a little warm. I was not quite up on my travel speed there. We're just a little hot. Way too much amperage still. Okay, it definitely works well. I just need to break my bad habits of not using a TIG pedal to be a little smoother at it. But as you can see, we got some pretty clean little beads there. Don't mind the arc strikes for me trying to break that arc off. And then I had some 1/8 inch here, which I was a little more consistent, but I was obviously way too hot. I didn't have a very big shielding lens on that. I'm used to using a scratch start where you actually strike it, whereas this lift TIG, you touch it and then you pull off. So it has to be a little more intentional to stay there for about 1.5 seconds before you pull off and it initiates that arc. So it's too smart for me. Okay, so now that I butchered a whole bunch of coupons here, we're going to move on to the 4th function of this machine, and that is running a spool gun off of it. Now, once again, this does not come factory with spool gun, but PRIMEWELD does provide these. So we're going to get this hooked up and give them a go. Another thing to remember is we are welding aluminum, so we want to be running 100% argon. So I switched over from the 75-25 tank to 100% argon already. So now that we have our gas and our spool gun hooked up here properly, first thing we're going to do is go through our functions here and make sure that we are on the MIG function. Then our process is going to pop up here. Oh, we didn't catch it, so we got to hold our advanced settings for 3 seconds. Process pops up, and then we're going to scroll through to aluminum and let the machine set there. Once the machine sets, we are going to open the cover. We're going to reach inside and hit our spool gun button. As soon as you do that, you have the option of 12 volt and 24 volt. And what I found is their spool gun runs off 24 volt. I do not know why they have those two options, but their spool gun will not work if you're on the 12 volt. Trust me. Okay, now we're going to break open some more of these Weld Metals Online weld practice coupons. We have some 1/8 inch coupons here, and then I've also got some other random pieces of thicker aluminum. I'm going to burn through a whole bunch of material and see how it performs. Okay, so this thing did pretty good. Definitely took me a little bit to dial in my settings. You can see here, we've got some 1/8 inch to 1/4 and laid in pretty good, but once I started getting things dialed in, like this one over here, we burned in pretty nice. This one was too cold. Did a couple little different ones. We got some, oh, that's still warm, hot, hot, hot. Don't do as I do. This is some 1/2 inch aluminum. Now you might have noticed I actually gave this a little bit of a preheat, and that's something that I found helps really well with a spool gun, is just preheating, especially your starting area a little bit, and it'll give it a huge jump. The other thing I noticed with a spool gun is you have to run a lot more volume of argon. So I'm running up closer to like 35 CHF instead of down to like 15 where I usually do when I'm MIG welding. So you gotta flow that a little more. And then also just kind of tip this gun forward and definitely push that weld, and it gets that argon coverage further forward over the weld. But overall, it seemed to function pretty good. Like I said before, make sure it's on that 24 volt setting. It does not work on the 12 volt. I'm not sure why there are two separate settings. I don't know if there's different spool guns or what, but it worked pretty good. I'm excited to use it on the project we got over here. We'll probably use it intermittently on this project we're gonna announce in a couple weeks. I'm excited about that, so stay tuned. Some of you guys already know what it is if you follow some of the posts, but I'm excited for that. Okay, so the final feature this machine is capable of is stick welding. Now, I can stick weld, but I don't feel like I am skilled enough to give a accurate review. So once again, we're gonna bring back my grandpa, which he's got about 40 years of experience in the marine industry, stick welding, and we're gonna see what his thoughts are. He ran through some 7018, some 6011, and some 7024, I believe, on this machine. So we'll cut over to a couple clips of grandpa running some rod.
I'm going to take my hearing aids out.
Okay.
Hearing aids tells you stuff that you don't want to hear. You get used to welding and your hearing, even though you can't hear it, you know, you get used to what you're supposed to hear and what you're not supposed to hear, you know. Here we go again.
Okay.
Ah, that's better. Sounds like DC now instead of AC. Yeah. Makes you like to bury the rod in the pedal and doesn't go out. Holy cow. That's nice. It's probably a little bit hot for this, you know, but yeah, I'm just a little bit hot. So I can go down.
There you go.
Okay, here we go again.
Okay.
See, right now I'm in one of the positions where I need to point the rod up and I can't point it up, so you just have to work with it until you get the rod, up where you can point it up. I'll try to run just a vertical and see what I can do with it, just without making a wash. Coast Guard specs. Okay, this is 7018, 532 7018. Okay, let's see what we got here. That's what it's supposed to do. See how it's picking up? The slag's picking up.
Okay, go ahead and break it off.
The imperfection of it is me.
It's pretty clean though.
I just can't hold a steady hand like I used to, you know. Not bad.
That's still not even bad for how much you were lifting up.
Not bad for an 8-year-old. Okay.
So you'd give it your stamp of approval?
Pardon?
I said you'd give it your stamp of approval?
Oh, yeah. Let's try some of this, Rod. I think it'll probably be about right. Yeah, it's a beautiful machine.
For something you can carry around. Okay, so my final thoughts with this machine. We'll start with the pros and then we'll move on to my cons with this machine. First off, my favorite thing about this machine is the on-demand fans. As you can see, this machine is on right now and the fans are not running. So it has thermostat inside, fans turn on only when you're using it or when it needs to cool down. I love that. Other thing I like about this is it pretty much is a multi-process machine. You can do MIG, you can do stick, you can do TIG, you can run the spool gun off of it. So it is very versatile as a single unit. It is a lift TIG, which definitely has its place. Not something I'm totally used to. Something I should probably practice more, actually. I also really like the stinger and the dual drive rollers this thing comes with. With those dual drive rollers, it just feeds wire so much smoother. Even when the stinger is twisted up, it doesn't get that kind of jerky catchy that you get sometimes on a smaller machine with a longer whip on it. So really appreciate the 15-foot whip. That'll be nice to be able to reach all the way across the shop without moving the machine. And the fact that you can stick a 35-pound spool in there, that'll be nice. You can get that wire in a larger quantity and sometimes get a little bit of that price break on it. This thing ran that dual shield like butter. It's really cool that you can jump up to that 045, run that big wire, and have the amperage to carry it. I know I showed this earlier, but on that dual shield flux core, these are all single pass on 1/2-inch material, and it just laid in like butter. It ran really smooth with that stuff. I'm definitely going to be using more dual shield in the future. I might just have a machine dedicated to that. Ran really good on the hard wire. Definitely just puts the heat into it. It's definitely a lot hotter machine than their other two machines. And on the hardware side of things, it worked really good too. We wet in this 1/2-inch to a 1/4-inch plate with 035 hardwire, and all those toes wet in really nice. You can see down the weld, there's a good profile on it. Let's see if I can get this to focus for you. It ran the spool gun really good. I didn't really notice that much difference between this and the MiG 180, which in theory there really isn't going to be that much difference. That seemed to be pretty comparable. And then another thing I really liked was the spot weld feature. I think that could be very useful for doing sheet metal or body work. You can dial in the time on that spot weld and figure out what thickness material you're working with and just bzz, bzz, and minimize the chance of overheating and blowing through that material if you're trying to do like thin sheet metal butt welds. So you can turn that inductance down, put that spot weld on, and just do some really nice clean sheet metal work. As far as the stitch, I don't know that I would ever really use that. I could see if for some reason you were able to set this up on an automated robot or something like that, you could set your on time and your off time. And if you're doing like a long joint and you want to stitch, you'd have your on time, off time, on time. But I don't think I would ever personally use that just manually, but it's there if you should decide to use it, I guess. But also don't confuse that with pulse welding. I've seen a lot of people in the last couple days, as this thing has launched, say that it has pulse weld, and it does not have pulse weld. It is a stitch function. It is not. Okay, so the things that I don't really care for about this machine. Number one thing I would say is, we'll pan you guys over here, what you set the voltage on this thing. I know I showed earlier that it's somewhat synergic, which is really cool, and to be honest, these settings have been pretty dialed on the synergic settings. But if you, in the event you did want to dial in your voltage, you have to do that in a percentage and kind of guess and wait for that to time out. It's definitely not a deal breaker for me. It's just a little different. I don't know if that difference bad. It's just not what I personally prefer. And the only other thing that I really didn't care for about it was, like I said, the bulkhead in there. And you don't notice it with the spool gun on here. Now, I know it's not best practice, or you should not do this, period, anyways. But everybody knows that when you're laying underneath the car and you run out of stinger length and your car is cantered a little bit, you're going to give it a little bit of tug and get that extra 2 inches. And I'm just curious what the long term of that bulkhead in there that holds those drive rollers. Now, the drive roller assembly is solid. It actually looks a lot like a lot of higher end machines that you see, and it looks very solid. It's just what it's bolted to that I have some concerns about. And I could be totally wrong with that. That's just my initial thoughts and opinion on that. That being said, this is just pretty much an unboxing video, so I've probably only got a total of maybe an hour running beads and stuff, maybe 2 hours on this machine. So it's not a hardcore review. Most of these other machines I've been doing a 1 year review, so we're gonna be putting this thing to the test over the next year, and once that rolls around and we get some good hours on this thing, we'll jump back on and make sure to subscribe, because we will be doing a later on 1 year review to see how this thing holds up and just see how it performs and longevity of it. So I'm excited about that. So I really appreciate you guys sticking around. It's an honor to me that you value my opinion on this. And if you are new to PRIMEWELD, make sure to check out their store. I want to thank them for sponsoring this video. They provide a wide arrangement of welding tools and machines, anything from TIG machines, stick machines, plasma cutters, and MIG machines. And they're developing more and more as the years go on. I've heard tale of even more stuff coming down the pipeline that they are working on, so I'm excited for that. So once again, thanks for PRIMEWELD for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys want to see more fabrication content, click some of the links that are going to pop up here. If you want to be notified of upcoming videos, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. It's free to do so. And go build something, guys.
Smaller and make a fat bead. Okay. This here is pretty well cut into the rod what you're going to do, like that.
And this is the 7024 you said?
Yeah, 7024. And you need to do that.
Okay.
You don't vary it. And basically it's just for flat weld